Well, hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new here, my name's Sydney, or you can also call me Squid. Check out this epic toque that my friend just made me. She sent me this beautiful Carhartt toque with a squid she embroidered on my hat that she made because everyone calls me Squid and it's the most amazing thing ever. I have a huge obsession with Carhartt toques, so yeah, huge shout out to my friend Dana. It's beautiful and I love it so much. That being said, I'm Sydney, I'm 26 years old, or Squid, and I live on Vancouver Island in beautiful British Columbia, Canada, and I film my financial journey and I share it publicly on YouTube here so that we can all learn together. I'm very new on my financial journey because I realized I had a lot to learn, so I thought, you know what, let me film my financial journey and everything I'm learning about, because I think it is so important and a topic that is just not talked about as much. And I really want to break the cliche of like money being this taboo topic, because it really shouldn't be. It's the one thing that unites us all. So with that being said, I share everything about my financial journey, from me paying off my debt, learning about life insurance and getting rid of my life insurance, to all of the mistakes I'm making, to everything I'm learning, and all of my money wins along the way as well. So if that's up your alley, feel free to continue watching this video. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps the channel out, as I'm newer here on YouTube and trying to grow my channel and hopefully build a wonderful community of people who are in very similar positions, making real income, trying to live their life and trying to enjoy their life as well as be financially responsible. And I'm a solo independent gal, so I'm trying to provide for myself, and I know that that can be difficult, but it can also be difficult when you are a single mom or a parent raising a family. I think just in general, it is hard for literally everyone right now with the state of the world. So let's go on this financial journey together. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing my Mexico budget and spend with me video. Travel wasn't a part of my plan for this year. However, two of my best friends were getting married. So amongst all the chaos of having debt and trying to pay off my debt and making sure that I'm living my life and showing up for the people that I care about the most, I decided to go to Mexico. But I did it in a very financially smart way. I really planned, and if any of you know me, past me, it was not a planner. To be honest, I'm the most spontaneous girl ever. I love to just be able to say yes to opportunities, but that always came at the cost of like leaning on credit cards and not being as financially smart, and going on a trip feeling super anxious and then coming back with all that stress and anxious and credit card debt too, and then being like, okay, well, I got to figure this out now, rather than coming home and being like, wow, what a great trip. My focus then turned on to, dang, I have this credit card debt. So I told myself if I was going to go on this trip to Mexico, I had to be financially smart and do it in a way where I wasn't going to lean on credit cards, and I wasn't going to come home stressed out, and I wanted to go on the trip feeling empowered and be in control of my money rather than my money in control of me. So it was really nice that this trip specifically didn't derail my financial progress like it used to, and it actually showed me a lot about how my financial behaviors and habits have changed, which has been really, really empowering and exciting to see, because I've really been putting in a lot of work over the last 6 months to change my financial story, change my financial habits, and just become better with money overall, and not let my emotional side kick in when I get bored and impulsive. So very proud of this trip. So I'm excited to go into detail and share some of the things that I learned and share some of the real numbers from my trip. So if you've ever felt stuck between living your life and getting your finances together, this video is for you. If you've been following my channel for the last couple months, you know I've been prioritizing paying off debt. And if you're anything like me, you might be an all or nothing person, which I very much fall into the category of being. And with finances, that was certainly the case, and something that I have been trying really hard at shifting and changing my behavior and the money story that I tell myself and the habits that I have with money, from impulsive spending to understanding what I value with money. And so when it came to debt, I had this story in my head that, okay, well, if I have debt, I can't travel, which is very much not the case. And so this trip was so eye-opening for me, because it made me realize that it truly wasn't the trip, it was actually the behaviors of traveling and how I treat money that made the biggest difference. Because old me would have booked trips impulsively. I know a few years ago I booked a trip to Costa Rica within like 2 weeks notice because my friends asked me to go. Was I in the financial position to go? Absolutely not. Was it amazing? Yes. However, that's not the point.
And I would also put flights on credit cards. I hated budgeting. I wanted to be a budgeter, but I was not good at it. It was so difficult for me to stick to a plan, and I felt really confused every time I would go and sit down. And then I'd also tell myself, which I'm sure a lot of you can relate to, is, oh, I'll just figure it out later. It'll all work itself out. It'll be fine. And then I'd come home to a bigger balance, and I would feel so stressed because now I'm like, well, I just came home from this really great trip, but I can't sit in these emotions of reflecting and being like, wow, what a great trip. Now my main focus is, okay, well, I guess I have to pay off this debt, and it's just getting bigger and bigger, but I also have to worry about real life and paying my bills at the same time. So it always felt really overwhelming. Not only was it overwhelming, that wasn't living my life. That was borrowing from future Sydney just so she could enjoy instant gratification. So this trip to Mexico was the first time I really did things completely differently, and I went from being someone who was very spontaneous to being a planner this trip. And let me tell you, I don't think I will ever travel any differently now, because this is the first trip where I felt so amazing for so many different reasons. I could live in the moment. I was so present. I was happy, and I didn't feel this constant state of anxiety just for the simple fact of I had a plan going into this trip. And when it came to the debt I had, I didn't ignore my debt going into this trip. I actually planned my trip around my debt, which was a huge game changer. Now, a lot of you guys did ask, hey Sid, why are you traveling if you have some debt? Like, we think that you should just hold off and not travel. It doesn't really make any sense. And I want to give you my perspective on this because I think there's a couple different ways of looking at it. Yes, if I had thousands and thousands of dollars of debt that was spiraling out of control, I would not have traveled because that would not have been financially responsible of me. However, there's something called opportunity cost, which I think is super important to mention. So opportunity cost is weighing out the cost of something, whether that be your time or your money, your energy, and weighing out what you're going to be losing out on if you do X or Y or whatever that might be. So for me, that question was, okay, so I can either pay my debt off a couple months earlier and miss my friend's wedding, which is a once in a lifetime opportunity to see them get married in Mexico with a group of my best friends, or I delay that debt by a couple of months and then I go to the wedding and I create these lasting memories with my friends that I will never forget and I will remember for the rest of my life. So the question became, well, do I want to miss this wedding, and how important is my debt to pay off? Which my debt is obviously very important, but because my friends are something that I deeply value, that was something that I valued even more than paying off my debt a couple months earlier. So I chose to go on this trip because it was a very special occasion. I had a plan going into this trip, which made the ultimate difference. So that being said, I want to walk you through the numbers and share exactly what I budgeted for this trip. So before I booked anything on this trip, I made a detailed itinerary list of everything that I anticipated spending, just to kind of have a rough idea as to what I wanted to spend and how much was realistic for food, transportation, hotels, and everything else in between. The only two exceptions to that were my airfare and my resort, which I'll walk you through here as well. Okay, so before I booked anything, I created a full travel budget so I knew exactly what this trip was going to cost ahead of time, roughly. Now, obviously there's going to be expenses that come up along the way that it's kind of hard to gauge, and I'm not a very experienced traveler myself, so I did the best that I knew what to do in advance, trying to gauge what things were going to cost based on some of the research I did. Here is what I planned. For my flight, I planned for $815.65, and the reason that number is so specific was I actually booked that about 6 months in advance. So when I did this budget, that was already accounted for. I had already purchased my plane ticket because I wanted to buy it ahead of time so I could save money on the flight. And I also had Skyscanner and different websites sourcing out to find me the best deal for my flight. So again, I'm not the most experienced travel, so this was the best deal that I could find. There was a sale on the website and it was actually closer to $600, but then when you added in everything that they get you with bag fees, it came to about $815.65. So I counted that into my budget so you guys could see that. Moving on, I budgeted $350 for transportation. Accommodation, I budgeted $1,539.80. About $1,200 of that was for the resort, so I had already purchased that and booked the resort months in advance, and then everything else there was for Airbnb costs. So I had gone onto Airbnb just to kind of gauge how much the rooms and hotels would cost me. So I had a rough idea before booking of what that would look like. So I budgeted $1,539.80 for the entire trip for accommodation. We have food and drinks, so I budgeted $400. And the reason that that might sound low to you for 10 days was because keep in mind for the first 4 or 5 days, I was actually in a resort. And then the last 4 days, I was going to another part of Mexico, to Tulum, staying in a hotel. So I really only had to worry about my food for about 4 or 5 days, give or take, whereas all of the food was included at the resort. So I only budgeted $400, which is about $100 a day, which is more than enough. Stay tuned and we'll talk about if I overspent or underspent in that category. Moving on, we budgeted $100 for miscellaneous just in case any expenses came up that I wasn't anticipating. It's always really helpful to have a little bit of a buffer. So I put $100 there. Moving on, we have wedding expenses. Because I was there for my friend's wedding, I just wanted to make sure I added on a little bit. I actually got my makeup done professionally when I was away. That was a cost, and I wanted to make sure that that was included in the budget. Moving on, we have activities and adventures, which I allocated $75 to. My plan for this trip wasn't to spend a lot on the tourism and the excursions because once again, I was trying to live below my means. So there was one day that I spent money on for an experience with my friends, which was really fun. But aside from that, I only budgeted $75. And then moving on, souvenirs, I budgeted $100, which was kind of steep and probably more than I needed to. So that brought my total plan budget to $3,530.45. This was really huge for me because in the past I would not have created a budget at all. I wouldn't have had any numbers to compare and to track while I was away. I would just spend whatever was necessary for the trip. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now is the time we've all been waiting for. Let's talk about what I actually spent while I was away in Mexico for 10 days for my friend's wedding. Flights. Now we already came to the conclusion I bought my flights in 6 months in advance, so we already spent that $815.65. Transportation though, I spent $156.13. Accommodation, I spent $1,697.20. For food, we spent $426.16. Miscellaneous, we spent $51.52. Tips. Now this is a category I had not planned for, but I spent $62.10 roughly. There was some other tips that were included in some of the purchases. So either way, it's all included in everything here, but those are the $62.10 was just extra money that I had given away cash to some of the workers along the way. And moving on, wedding expenses, I ended up spending $196.73. Activities, $150, and then souvenirs, $83.65, bringing my total trip cost to $3,639.14. And my original budget was $3,530.45, which means overall I overspent by $108.69. And honestly, I'm really, really proud of that because I'm not going for perfection. Going traveling, there's always going to be unexpected costs come up. So the fact that I was able to stay in that range by $110 was actually really impressive for me, and I'm very proud of that. Okay, so let's actually break down some of these categories because some were way under budget and some were over budget. So transportation was $350 and I actually spent $156. And the reason being, in my head, I was budgeting for transportation, like primarily being on my own or maybe with one other person, but I ended up traveling with a handful of friends every single time we got around. And my friend also rented a car for a handful of the last days. So that really saved a lot. So I did not spend as much as I thought I was going to spend, which is really nice. For miscellaneous, I budgeted $100 and I spent $51. So I came very much under budget. I don't quite remember what the purchases were. Nothing crazy, but I think it would be like I got Advil a couple times, water here and there. So I just put those purchases under miscellaneous. And moving on to souvenirs, I budgeted $100 and I ended up spending $83. Of that, I got a few keychains for some coworkers, and then I bought myself a nice ring that I really liked. So that one was not bad at all. And then a few things obviously came in a lot higher than expected, but even so, they weren't significantly higher. But accommodation, I budgeted $1,539 and I actually spent $1,697. And that is because I upgraded my hotel for the last couple nights for a couple different reasons, but I was really happy I made that shift. My friends and I kind of all ended up leaving our Airbnbs that we were at and going to this really nice hotel. And so a couple $100 extra to just really enjoy the last couple days of the trip was well worth it. So I'm not mad about that at all. And then for food, obviously I budgeted $400 and I actually spent $426, which I'm super happy about because along the way there's a couple purchases in there that I included that I was helping out with friends. So it wasn't even all for me, which is really nice. And then activities, I budgeted $75 and I ended up spending $150. So definitely double what I had anticipated, but that's okay. And then obviously the tips ended up being about $62, which I hadn't included in my original budget. It didn't even dawn on me. That's why having a buffer is really important. Sometimes there's going to be expenses that come up when you're traveling that you just aren't thinking about. But ultimately, because I planned this trip and while I was away, nothing felt stressful. It was the first time I didn't experience a lot of anxiety traveling due to being financially strapped or feeling like I didn't have control over my money. And it was really nice. And honestly, it just came down to, okay, I might want to spend a little bit more in this category and that's fine. But because I was tracking, I was able to make those changes within the plan, which was really helpful. But I think that the thing that I'm most proud of from this trip wasn't the math and the numbers, although that is a huge win. It was really the behavioral changes that I made because old Sydney wouldn't have done a lot of the things I did this trip. And it really showed in my attitude, my mood, my anxiety levels, and I don't think you can put a price tag on not feeling anxious and feeling happy and actually being able to feel present in a moment. I think that there's something really beautiful about that. And I know for me, old travel version Sydney would have trips funded by leaning on credit card debt, which is not fun. And I would have not tracked any of my spending. I wouldn't have known where any of my money was going. I would have used my card and I would have just been tapping all over the place and being very emotional with my spending and impulsively buying things that I probably didn't need. And I would have come home to financial regret ultimately and feeling stressed out because, well, now I went on this great trip, but now I have to figure my debt out. And that's just not a fun place to be in when you're traveling. So obviously this trip was very different, but I think some of the things that made key differences was saving ahead of time and really planning this out months in advance and kind of having an idea of what I was going to spend and saving that money so that I had it already there waiting for me and I wasn't having to lean on credit card debt. Tracking my spending every day, and whenever I'd go out, I'd keep the receipts, and when I get home in the evenings or get back to my hotel, I would just do a quick financial audit and I would say, okay, how was my spending today? How much of my money that I saved for this trip have I spent so far? How am I stacking up against what I've budgeted for this trip? And if I needed to make any changes, I would make changes given how my spending went that day, which made a huge game changer. So for the entire trip, I was just very aware of where my money is going, which I think is really important. And again, obviously I overspent by $108, but the goal ultimately isn't perfection when you're traveling, but it's just having an idea and it's creating that progress. It's being able to, okay, I'm going to travel and enjoy myself, but I want to do that in a way where I'm going to come home and not feel stressed out. I'm not going to have to lean on debt or credit cards to fund my trip. So $108 over was a huge win and I'm super proud of that. And honestly, old Sydney wouldn't have even known how much she spent on a trip. I would have just accepted the fact that, okay, I'm in like $3,000-$4,000 of debt. I guess I got to figure out how to pay this off. So I'm very proud to know the numbers and to have stuck to a plan and to make the changes along the way if I needed to and know the numbers coming home. It's so empowering and I highly encourage you to do the same thing. Another element to this trip I want to talk about is that when I got home, because I didn't have any debt, something that happened, which I was so excited about, was my trip was paid off. I didn't have to worry about anything. And I actually had a work bonus come in for 8% and ended up being about $1,500, which was so exciting. And had I come home from that trip with debt, my bonus would have gone straight to funding my trip and having to pay that debt. But because I had a plan and I had already saved up for it, that $1,500 I got to put towards another form of my debt that I was working towards paying off, which was my line of credit. So now I'm sitting here a few weeks later and my line of credit is completely paid off, which feels so good. And I never had to stress about financial burdens of being in debt after a trip because I had to lean on credit card debt, which is super nice. So in closing, this trip actually taught me some really important things, and that Oftentimes, travel isn't actually the problem, it's the behavior is. You can still travel, you can still enjoy your life and still make progress towards your goals if you create a plan. Having a plan alleviates so much stress. And I know if you're not a planner, because trust me, I was never a planner. I was like the most spontaneous gal ever. I want to be able to say yes to opportunities when they come up. But if you plan ahead of time in a very strategic way and you're smart with your planning, you can still be spontaneous. You can still go with the flow, because I never once felt like I was trapped in a box when I was traveling. Planning and having that budget and having a plan in place allowed me more freedom and flexibility the entire trip, because I wasn't stressing, I wasn't worried. And I know that if I wanted to overspend in one category, I could just go and make those little changes and tweaks inside the plan later on in the evening when I got back to my hotel. And that made a huge change. And let me tell you, intentional decisions feel so much different than impulsive decisions. But let me tell you, there's a middle ground, and that middle ground is that sweet, sweet spot where you can still achieve your goals, but you can still enjoy living your life. And that is such a wonderful place to be in. So yes, my goal is to ultimately build wealth, but it's also to pay off debt and to build a life that I love along the way and to enjoy every single day, and not just create wealth so that Sydney in the future can enjoy it, so that I can enjoy my life today, and then future Sydney 20 years from now can also enjoy life because of the habits and actions that I'm taking today. 6 months ago, quite frankly, Sydney would have seen budgeting or planning as something more like a chore, almost as a punishment. But the further I go on my financial journey, the more I realize how lucky I am that I get to create a plan. I get to budget, because there are some people who aren't even in a position at all to be able to budget, to be able to control their finances. And there's other people who are obviously always going to be doing better than us. Not fair to compare ourselves to them. We can look at them for inspiration and for motivation, but I think it's also really important to ground ourselves and to remind ourselves how lucky we are. I have a roof over my head. I have the ability to plan and to create momentum towards some of my financial goals. And I think that's such a beautiful position to be in. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something from this or took something away from it. That being said, if you want to see more financial videos and follow along on my financial journey as I continue to pay off my debt and work towards investing and saving goals and also just enjoying life, hit subscribe and follow along for more.